Each week when I release an episode, I just feel so thankful to the guests that join me, that share their time, their expertise, and I'm often joined by guests who have years and years and years of experience and expertise and varied expertise across many elements of the topic that we're talking about. And today is no different. Today we are joined by Clare Rowe, who founded Rowe and Associates Child and Family Psychology. Clare is joining us from Sydney and she's so experienced, and we're here today to talk about families, about mental health, about anxiety, and what we can do to not only support our children and have really meaningful conversations and share skills and ideas around emotional resilience and emotional intelligence and regulation and anxiety, but also the things that we can do to look after ourselves as well, because how we are greatly affects everyone around us. And we know this, don't we? We know this. Clare is an educational and developmental psychologist. Her experience extends from paediatric psychology, including assessments and diagnosis of childhood disorders such as ADHD, autism spectrum disorders, learning disorders, and giftedness. She also has experience in the treatment of childhood and adolescent anxiety and depression, and working with parents to support them with behavioural management and also oppositional behavioural difficulties as well. So Clare has seen it all and heard it all, and I'm pretty sure that there's nothing when it comes to childhood and family mental health that Clare hasn't addressed with her clients in the past. Clare is a podcaster. She also works in family court, and she is a clinician as well as running her practice, and many strings to her bow. And it's really lovely to have you here with us, Clare. So welcome to Well Hello Anxiety.
Hi, Jodie. Thank you so much for having me and that lovely introduction. Thank you.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I really appreciate it. I know time is so precious, isn't it? And, you know, we've both got families, and I think life just seems busier than ever before. And we were both saying off air how we were kind of, you know, hopping from burrow to burrow, as one of my guests would say, and, you know, taking care of all the things we need to take care of. So your time is precious, and it's really appreciated. So I want to start by really talking to you about, I guess these days, you know, we talk a lot more about feelings and emotions. We have brilliant movies like Inside Out and Inside Out 2, and we're just more knowledgeable, I think, as a society around emotional regulation and intelligence. There's a lot of information for us. There is a lot of information for us to digest, even if we're just skimming through somebody's feed on Instagram or we're diving deep into the research. I wonder what your thoughts are around our tendency to pathologise feelings that are really normal. I'd really love you to talk with us about that and help us kind of get some perspective, please.
Thanks, Jodie. It's such a good topic that I'm particularly passionate about, and sometimes I think I'm a bit of a lone wolf in some of my views, a little bit different in terms of teaching our children particularly and talking about their feelings and emotions. And I think in no way do we want to go back to repressing feelings or not talking about emotions, and previous generations certainly did that. I think around the 1990s was when kind of mental health education really started, and it came into our schools, and that's when Medicare became involved in Australia with funding psychology appointments, and that's all very, very good. As a psychologist, I'm certainly, you know, an advocate for people educating themselves around mental health conditions and ultimately reducing any stigma or getting rid of any stigma or reluctancy to come forward if someone is really struggling and asking for help. So I think that's very admirable, and I think that's certainly what we should be teaching our children, to label feelings. There's a lot of resources about that, identifying how they feel, and certainly putting their hand up and, you know, speaking to someone if they're not feeling great. Though I talk a lot and I write a lot about the fact that perhaps we're going a little bit too far. I know I've got young primary school aged children, and I know with many children, they have feeling check-ins through the day at school where, they're asked kind of to identify how they're feeling in the morning, how they're feeling after lunchtime. They might identify it on a board. They might, pick a face, an emotion face to identify how they're feeling. And there's a couple of issues I have with that. And one is if someone's not feeling great at the start of the day and they kind of identify and verbalize that, it doesn't really set them up for a great day at kind of an eight-year-old level to say, I'm feeling really bad today. And just actually kind of verbalizing that is kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy it can be. But also, there's a lot of research that I think sometimes we forget about the correlation or the connection between focusing a lot on how we feel and kind of feeling worse, feeling depressed and anxious. So the more we kind of have this navel gazing kind of introspection about kind of, trying to elicit all these feelings from kids. How do you feel now? And how do you feel when this happens? And it's kind of, sometimes it can make things worse. And it's a lot of research shows that if you ask someone repetitively how they're feeling, they're very unlikely to give positive answers. Eventually they will give you a negative answer. And that's all because our brain is pretty hardwired actually to be a bit more pessimistic, and to look out for threats and think a little bit more negatively, actually. So yeah, coming back to your point, I think, what we need to be really talking about with our children and ourselves is that happiness is not the goal every day. And, that's not the normal human experience. And if we're scared or we're worried or we're feeling sad, relative to what's going on in our lives, that's really normal.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just want to normalize those feelings. And I'm reluctant to even use words, certainly with children and even teenagers, like anxiety. I'd rather them describe how they feel so that they're feeling a bit nervous or a bit worried about something. And I think once I kind of, teenagers particularly are very skilled up these days on social media with labels. And once a teenager can kind of, hear that they've got this label, it does become part of their identity. So I almost steer away from that too with children. But I do think that sometimes we have a tendency to, look at symptoms of anxiety or look at symptoms of depression and or sadness and kind of think, oh, there's something wrong with my child, rather than trying to teach them that, you've got a test tomorrow, or you're going to somewhere new today, or you're just having an off day. That's okay. And that's what
Yes.
you mean about the, over pathologizing. It's, yeah, it is a problem.
Thank you for your insights around this. And it's getting me thinking, as a parent of two teenagers and as somebody who obviously works in schools, and typically in schools, I typically only talk to year 11 and 12 students, and parents and teachers and principals and the like. But when it comes to this idea is in a family, when we see our child suffering, it's painful for us as parents, isn't it? And there can be a part of us, especially if we are prone to a bit of anxiety ourselves, to sort of think, oh, what does this mean? And kind of catastrophize it. Whereas all feelings are human, all feelings are normal, all feelings are important. There's always a good reason. They tell us something about what we're experiencing and maybe what we need, or maybe something we did. If our kids feel a bit guilty about something, it might be a sign for them to next time maybe make a different decision or do something differently. And so what would you recommend to maybe teachers who are working with students in this capacity, wellbeing leaders or parents? What would you say to sort of, if anyone's feeling a bit sort of confused as, oh gosh, I don't know kind of where to go from this, because this is a really important conversation. What kind of suggestions could you make? Is it that we wait for students and for children to come to us? Is it, at what point do we start helping them to learn to kind of label their feelings? Because we know that actually being able to accurately label it can reduce some of the distress. So where's kind of the middle ground here?
Okay, so I'll just go back a little bit to something you said, and particularly about being a parent yourself. I think, in no way certainly I'm criticizing parents, because I think the information overload these days that parents receive is part of the problem.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of part of that industry because parenting is an industry these days. And so I
Yeah.
kind of hate to say that, but I'm part of that. But between kind of Facebook community groups and blogs and podcasts and books and just generally the internet, it's, it's really a different landscape that we live in where previous generations, if you think back to our mothers, I mean, I've asked my mother before, were you worried about our self-esteem as children or if we were loved? And she would looked at me like I was nuts. Like, of course I didn't. I was too busy for that. And I knew I was loved and, we got on with it. But, if
Mm,
she needed some advice regarding parenting, I think she would ask her mother, who asked her mother. She said she
yeah.
might have asked a close friend, but really it wasn't chatted about a lot. Now, there is a middle ground to that, but unfortunately now, we have parents, particularly mothers, trawling through information into the wee hours of the evening. And of course, you will get conflicting information on every single site that you go on of what to do with your child who's not eating or tantruming or not sleeping or whatever. So
Mm,
the the information overload that's well beyond now just Dr. Google is part of the problem and
yeah.
creating uh, parental anxiety. And parents are bombarded with the message about early intervention. And if you don't get into it early, they're presented with suicide rates of teens. And I mean, it's just parents are
Mm,
scared. And
mm,
this mental health message, parents are worried. And what I see with that is that they're losing their gut instinct that's biological on
mm,
how to parent because they question everything.
yeah.
So, they come to me and they've read every book and they've already asked the mums group and the online group and everything else. And I try to just get rid of all that noise and say, when your child is being defiant or your child is not acting themselves or withdrawing to their bedroom, let's sit for a while and just see if you can come up with what your gut tells you to do. And it's difficult at first, but eventually people do it. And I think that's the problem with, of course, too much information. Some information is good, too much is overwhelming, and our parents are worried. And so I really do feel for parents trying to navigate this in this climate.
Oh, me
Um,
too. Yeah, yeah. Claire, what
it's
you've
so difficult.
it really is, and you're on the sort of the coal face of this in your clinic, and you are speaking to parents and hearing these stories of these families where people feel this classic, what is it, analysis paralysis, and so
Mm,
you've so much information and still no more confident about how to move forward. And what you said before about listening to our gut instinct, I I'm so thankful that this is something that you've shared with us today, because and I wonder, as parents, as you're listening, if you like I'm doing now, reflect on scenarios where the anxiety might dial up a little bit about something that's going on. That classic, Claire, when we collect our child from school pickup, if we're lucky enough to get to sort of pick them up after school, even on occasion, and that face, when they've got that face and you go, oh,
mm,
something's gone wrong. And our gut can turn and we can worry, what have they been going through? Can they deal with it? What's happening? What does this mean? And, for some people that kind of what if thinking can come in. But I think just taking the pressure off ourselves. What I'm hearing from you is this idea that we can just take some of the pressure off ourselves, stay connected with our kids, listen to sort of gather the information about what's happening, and then we do have a wisdom within us where
mm,
we're on a journey, always learning as parents, aren't we? But I know before, there've been times when I've sort of thought, gosh, I wonder what this could mean, and my mind's been racing ahead and telling a story of you know terrible news about school experiences in the coming days and weeks. But when I stopped and just noticed my thinking and recognized that I was doing that and kind of looked at it for what it is, looked at what I had in front of me and what I was seeing, I kind of got this sense of relief that came over me that, oh, okay, this is today, this is something that's happening now. Let's just wait and see. The door's open for conversation, and my kids are a bit older. I know you've got primary school age kids, but I think, yeah, just, taking a breath, relaxing our shoulders, and just taking the pressure off ourselves and listening listening to what our inner parenting wisdom tells us, it's brilliant advice. I'm thankful to you for that.
I think, look, I've got a couple of catchphrases that seem to come out with clients I work with and families I work with. And one of them is, your job is to turn out a fully functioning, independent human being, and you've got 18 years to do it. Okay. And that's your job. Your job is
Yeah.
not, and I know parents have heard this, but to really take this on board, your job is not to make life smooth for them and perfect for them, because that's not doing your job. That's not equipping them
Mm.
to turn an 18-year-old out into the world. And our job is not to rush in and relieve them of that bad day necessarily, or that problem, or to march into school and fix what's happened. And the other thing to remember is that children are still humans like us. They're just younger, right? And so we can come home after a bad day at work with a pretty miserable face at times. We can come home angry and fed up. We can eat more some days, eat less some days. We can, we have variability, and
Yeah.
that's okay. So children who walk out of school, to take that example, and you can see their face, it's like, okay, they've had a bad day. Well, I'll ask them what's wrong, and I'll listen to them, because that's helpful for them to have someone there at the end of the day, just as it is for us, whether that be
Yeah.
a friend or a spouse. Um, but, sometimes we want to come up with the solution and fix it. So there you go, it's fixed. You can
Mm.
go back to being happy now. Um, but often we can't do that. But
Mm.
that's okay, because that's not our job. Our job is to actually teach them that this was a bad day. And I joke around with kids all the time when things happen, and I say, you know what though, you've got a head and two arms and two legs, and you survived it.
Yeah.
You will survive
Yeah.
it for the day, and that's okay. And I'm not sure what's going to happen tomorrow. I don't know if tomorrow is going to be a better day, but we'll see. So that's
Mm.
the kind of language around the non-pathologizing things. It's letting them know that you're certainly there for them. You
Yeah.
could offer some suggestions or some help them problem solve, but your job is not to come in and try and relieve them of any hardship, adversity, um, distress, even, and just to be with them in it. And that's very hard for some parents to do.
How can parents who really struggle with that discomfort, because it's everything from uncomfortable to really painful, and that's very individual, isn't it? What would you say to parents who do struggle with that and might have this awareness that they don't cope well with their distress or upset or discomfort of one of their kids, and kind of tend to want to jump in and fix it and kind of make everything kind of better again, in air quotes? How would you support a parent who's sort of wanting to be able to tolerate that discomfort a bit more but has struggled to date?
I think the parents that I talk to that struggle with this, there is usually, not always, but there's usually something there in the history with that child. They were very sick. Perhaps they were premature. Perhaps you tried very hard for them through IVF. Perhaps this was, your baby, the last one. Perhaps
Yeah.
there's some type of narrative there that usually comes out with parents. And it's trying to release them of that, first of all, and trying to get them to take on that perspective, like I said, that what you're doing for them by not relieving and solving all the problems and taking away the feelings, what you're doing is equipping them with such good skills, and you're actually loving them by doing that. So it's trying to reframe your mind and
Mm.
trying to take a moment yourself, if you need it, to say, if I rush in here and fix this problem, today my child may feel better if I soothe them by buying them something, or if I give in some way, or if I rush up to school to change the classroom because she's not happy in the classroom she's in, or whatever it may be. She will be happy today and possibly this week. But in the long term, what am I doing to her or my child here? What am I teaching them? And to be the best loving parent, that's actually not what I need to be doing right now.
Mm.
So it's trying to maintain that long term perspective.
Mm.
And there's, lots of things alternatively that you can do to comfort your child. I'm not saying kind of telling children, oh, don't worry about it, or again, going back to dismissing or minimizing feelings, or, we can certainly sit with them and provide a lot of affection and tell them, I'm really sorry that happened. And yep, you have a right to feel sad today. That day sucked or whatever.
Yeah.
But not going that next step of trying to placate them with, here, I'll buy you something, or I'll fix the problem, or I'll remove the feeling for you.
Yeah.
Um, and the other thing I would just want to get in for listeners too is that as a child psychologist, and that's, a title I go by, most of the work I do is with parents. And I'm a
Mm.
very, very firm believer in that. There's nothing wrong with you heading along, and this comes back to, you asking kind of, when do we know what to do as teachers or parents when we're watching a child struggling? When do we step in? There's nothing wrong with a parent. In fact, I'd encourage it, going along to a child psychologist just for their own appointment. There are
Mm.
many clients I work with where I have never met the child,
Hmm.
right? Mum or dad will come along for one couple of appointments for some reassurance, some practical strategies. And so that might be something that you consider. Going along to a child psychologist should not mean signing up your child to going to talking to someone else. In fact, I'm
Mm.
just a huge believer that parents are the best therapists for children.
Yeah.
And so if you go along for a one-off consult for some practical advice, or maybe just some reassurance that this is normal, carry on, that can do a world of good. And I don't think parents know that that option is available.
I don't think so either.
Mm.
And the idea of, in the same way that I was recently talking to somebody about couples therapy, and we were talking about how even if your partner doesn't want to go along, you can go along on your own
Mm.
for some support and counselling and therapy around your relationship by yourself. And it's often sort of thought child psychologist, oh, seeing children. But like you say, the influence that we have as parents is profound. And we have the most time with them. Most of us have the most time with them, more than anyone else.
Mm.
Obviously depending on the family setup and arrangements and things. But yeah, it's that instinct, isn't it? Because we're wired to feel pain when our kids feel pain. We're wired to nurture and to care. And what you said before, I really want to emphasize. It's beautiful. We absolutely can comfort, and that's important. And validate. Yeah, that does suck. I'd feel that way too. But even just this morning, my daughter looked at her timetable, Claire, and she's in year 8. She goes, "Oh, we've got health instead of PE again. Why aren't we having PE? And we never get
Mm.
PE, and we've always got a sub, and lots of schools are having problems with staff and COVID and sickness and
Mm.
all of that kind of thing." And my initial instinct was, in my head, this is kind of my monologue in my head. None of it came out of my mouth, but I was thinking, oh, I wonder how many PE lessons they've been getting. Oh, it's so important to be able to have that exercise. It's so good for their mental health, and they need to get out of the classroom. And why is this happening? And I wonder if this is going to continue to happen. And all of this is going on in my head because it's not the first time she said it, because she's disappointed. And I said, yeah, that stinks. I'm sorry that that's the case. This seems to have been happening a bit, and I had to kind of put the reins on myself, because my instinct, even as much as I know and as experienced as I am, I'm experienced in responding and validating and not being Mrs. Fix-It. But gosh, that those thoughts were still there. I just had to notice them and then just let them go and really validate. So it's not something
Mm.
that happens overnight when we're making these changes. That's for sure.
No, no, definitely. And one of my favorite expressions, in fact, I'm getting it made as a big plaque in my office, actually, that I just, tell kids every single day, including my own,
Yeah.
is just the very simple expression, we can do hard things.
Yes.
We can do
Yeah.
hard things. And so it's that whole, in teaching resilience, which is a bit of a catchword with kids. But if we want to teach resilience, the whole premise of that is that life won't be as we want it, and
Mm.
things won't work out as we want them to work out, and we will have to do things that we don't want to do,
Mm.
but that we can do them, and we can do them whilst feeling anxious, and we can do them
Yes.
whilst not feeling great. We have this remarkable ability as humans, to be able to say, this terrifies me, or it really is the last thing I want to do today. Yet I can put one foot in front of the other and I can go, even if it's just going through the motions, and I can get through it. And I did it.
Mm.
And that's a huge lesson for kids. And I
It,
know it's
yeah.
it's we need to be careful in terms of, a messaging also in today's culture about self-care and taking it easy and recognizing when you're struggling. And I know that that's a message there, but I think for our children, they very much need the other side of the coin, which is not to avoid hard things and not to avoid things that we don't want to do, or that create anxiety for us.
Mm.
And the reward that comes from that, of pushing through and simply making yourself do the speech in front of the class, or go to the event or the sports carnival that you don't want to go to because you hate it. Okay,
Mm.
you're allowed to hate it, but you will get through it and you'll survive it and you'll
Yeah,
live, and tomorrow will come and it'll be another day.
that's it. As you said before, our job is to turn out a fully functioning, independent human being. And as we know as adults, life is challenging at times. There are things we have to do for work, even for leisure. Sometimes we have to do things that we might not want to do. Or if you having to go along to an event that you'd really rather not, but it's important. And this ethos, I think, is so important for us all to role model, and for us to talk sort of more openly about as well. And like you said, we can do hard things. We as adults do hard things every day. And I do feel as though, it's hard for kids these days. And I will say to my kids every now and again, it seems pretty hard being a kid. Tell me what sort of the toughest part. And usually from the teenage girl, it's this idea of fitting in. And I mean, that socially she's fine, but I also know that when we really are equipping them for life well beyond our nest. And, in the same way that we're doing driving lessons with our son, and other friends have been doing driving lessons. And one of my friends, she was talking to another parent saying, oh gosh, I haven't gotten out on the freeway yet with my daughter. And they said, well, do you want them to do it with you, or do you want them to do it on their own? And it's kind of a philosophy we can think of, that we can in a loving, supportive, nurturing environment where there is comfort and validation and support, help them through these days, and they know that they'll get through them. They'll know that the sun will come up the next day, so that when they are beyond our, the walls of our home, which, is going to be at a different stage for different families and different people listening, but that they are well equipped and they are more resilient, because resilience isn't built in a vacuum. Resilience builds, doesn't it, as a result of being able to go through something and develop the skills you need and the coping strategies and the wherewithal to get through it and to go, I got through it. And that means next time I'm faced with something challenging, I've got some experience behind me. I got through it before. Here's something new that's challenging. I'm feeling a bit more empowered to get through it again. There won't be that kind of thinking happening in the brain, but it's that embodied sense of kind of, I can do it even though it's hard.
That's right. I mean, it's like a muscle, isn't it, that we're using. And, I say to parents that in those 18 years, what you want to do is you want to replicate how the real world works on a much smaller scale and within the safety and comfort and love of your home. And so that's always a good reflection too, to try and get parents to try and think independently of how they should address situations as well. I mean, in terms of I'm I've kind of built a career being pretty common sense and advocating for still natural consequences for children in their choices of behavior, teaching them that there are, if you choose certain behaviors, then these are the paths and consequences that you choose, and trying to get parents to reflect, well, what would happen in the real world in this situation? And if we can, as I said, mirror or replicate that in some way in the safety of our home for the first 18 years, then that is your job, and that's the preparation you're going to give them so that they don't get a rude shock at
Yes.
20s when they say, oh my goodness, no one runs up my lunch to me at work. This is, because and it's we joke about it, but I use examples to scare parents with young children to say, I am aware of um, young adults in their 20s who find it enormously difficult to make a GP appointment for themselves, who find it incredibly difficult to go for a job interview without mum there to support them. And so we don't want that
Mm,
for our children. Time's ticking, and that's usually my advice. And in amongst all that too, giving opportunities increasingly from the minute children are toddlers for independence, I
mm,
think can be a wonderful antidote for anxiety, because I think if a child feels competent in their abilities and they feel like they can master something and they feel like, oh, I can go and do this by myself now, I don't need mum or dad, that's incredibly beneficial for their self-esteem, and will absolutely minimize the onset of things like, worry and anxiety in them. And I think generally speaking, and I know this is said a lot, but parents find it difficult to implement practical changes. It's that our children today are not as independent as children were in a previous generation.
mm,
Um, we do tend to, um, I think, overprotect them in the real world,
yeah.
and I say a lot, underprotect them in the online world. It's just a bizarre inversion of that we let kids kind of sit in rooms exposed to the whole world through a device. But we
Yeah.
very much overprotect them and don't let them walk up the streets to the shops. I find that very
Yes.
just a
Yes.
bizarre concept.
It is bizarre, isn't it? I was having this same conversation this morning with some women I train with, and we were talking about roadblocks and just how, and there was an example. One of the women in our coach actually shared, that there's some really serious issues with a whole range of, the online space is just probably a whole nother conversation. But you're right. When you look at it, when you lay it out like that, that you could, it's akin to sending your child, letting them loose online with few boundaries and restrictions and learning and knowledge and understanding and all of that kind of thing is akin to sort of sending them out into a room full of total strangers of any age, any background. Whereas in our local communities, when we move around every day and we know a lot of the people around us, to walk to the shops or to walk to the bus, to catch a bus to the local shops, or age appropriate to be able to jump on a train and head into, like from where we are, head into Southland or head into the city. I mean, I was going into the city with my friends in year 9 when I was a teenager, and yet my son, who's 16, will go to the footy with his mates on the train, which is about an hour's ride, and my daughter, who's 14, is just starting to go on the train, but not all the way into town, not yet. But so I'm trying to give this freedom and independence, but it's hard, isn't it? So what are some of the
Yeah.
things that parents can, when we think about independence, like if you had a wish list of some of the things that parents will start to consider for their children, and maybe approximate ages that they're appropriate. Are there a handful of things that you could suggest for parents to kind of get started if they're kind of ready to kind of, walk down this path and start to sort of let go of the reins a little bit?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing to remember is that independence is not suddenly going to appear on their 16th birthday or their 18th birthday. It is a lifelong thing. And I don't think there's an age where you can't start. So, for
Mm,
example, I always say that I think if a child is physically capable of doing something, that you should let them do it. Now, I know it will be slower and I know it won't be done as well, but I remember my 3-year-olds, putting washing in a washing machine, putting the powder in, pressing the button to the point where I think, by the time they got to 4, I'd say, put the washing machine on. They'd toddle off and do it. Like I wasn't
yeah.
supervising it. But they felt great about that. They were like, oh, yeah, I know how to do that.
Mm,
And, so giving them just daily opportunities to say, well, you can do that yourself. And as I said, I think that starts from preschool years. And the other thing too, if you're trying to think of where you're at in terms of benchmarks, I think it's fine to think about what you did as a child of that age.
Mm.
I think that that is a fine benchmark to use because I agree. I think back to my childhood in suburban Sydney, and we were riding bikes in primary school down to the local corner shop and buying an ice cream and hanging out, I think, for a couple of hours and coming back. And everyone kind of remembers that. But there were no smartwatches, there was no tracking, there was no,
No.
ability to contact us.
Mm.
Mum knew we were somewhere along the street and into the next cul-de-sac. And that was that. And we did it. So when I look at that, my own children now, I'm telling them, well, they are 6 and 7. Now, these upcoming school holidays, I'm saying, well, there's no roads to cross. We literally live around the corner from a supermarket. You could walk around to the supermarket with each other, walk in, get some bread, hand the money over, and walk back.
Yeah.
And they were like, really? And I said, yes, you could do it. Now, am I going to be on the end of that driveway? Absolutely, just like beside myself until I can
Yes.
see them. Yes, I will. I will. But I don't think there's, that's anxiety exposure for parents. And I think parents need a lot
Yeah.
more of that.
Yes, we
You have
do.
to give them chances and you have to trust them. And I'm gonna get them to do that because that would be
Mm.
mighty handy for me to get the milk and bread as well.
Totally.
But they're very excited and there's hold each other's hand and there's, as I said, there's no roads to cross and
Yeah.
you just hand it over. But certainly when we go to shops now, I try and get them to order things. That's a very simple thing that you can get kids to start doing,
Yes.
is to, or if you're at the front of the shop in the car, get them to run in and duck in and talk to a stranger and say hello and order something. And, you know, um, they need to be pushed a bit in that way. There's many life skills there that I think were just inherently normal for a previous generation.
Yeah.
I very much worry are not normal now, are big deals to children. Whereas
Mm.
if my parents handed me $20 or $5 back then and said, go to the shops, I'd be out the door like a flash.
Yes.
Um, and so I think, kids are generally speaking, without, I don't want to label it as an anxiety disorder, but they're generally more cautious, anxious, avoidant, fearful. And that is because we have raised them in this, um, new generation of, I think, too much safetyism, if you like.
Yes.
And, we all caught trains to school and buses back and we didn't have phones. I mean, how did we do it? It's like,
I know.
yeah.
Oh, I saw a post that said, how we know how kids know where each other are now, and it showed a snap map where people had their
Mm,
all the kids had their locations turned on, and for those of you who aren't in that stage of life at the moment, kids who they can turn on their location a bit like Life 360 or one of the tracking apps, and you can literally look on the map and see, who's at whose house. And whereas when we were kids, it was all the bikes that were on the lawn. There were
yeah.
simpler days in many ways. And, the anxiety you were saying about us as parents. And I love what you were saying about getting to the end of the drive and you'll be waiting for the kids. And when our daughter recently and her friends caught the train to Southland, which is a sort of Westfield shopping centre, about 35 minutes on the train line, I was keeping an eye on things, but I also like, yes, it makes me anxious. Yes, it is something that I know is important and, said yes to. This is all part of sort of growing up. But I think it's really important for us to say, it's not necessarily going to be easy for us to do some of these things as they get older, and that independence it means sort of venturing further away from us and travelling and public transport and those sorts of things. And so, but it's important that we recognise that our anxiety doesn't get in the way of their independence and their growth, doesn't it? Because it so easily can. I know how easily it can. I mean, I've been there myself. But what would you say to that?
Oh, absolutely. I would say that, but the alternative is disastrous. The
Mm.
alternative to not let them do things while you're at home feeling incredibly anxious, yes. But the alternative is a very dependent child well into their 20s on you. That
Yeah.
is not what you want for your child. And someone that can't, problem solve. And that's what I think children generally these days, particularly with, as I said, the contact with the mobile phones and things. If for example, if kids, previous generation were catching the train, I remember once as a 12-year-old catching the train to high school in year seven, and I'd missed the stop and I'd ended up at another stop, and there was tears and panic. But then I had to think, what do I do? And I had to think and go and ask, the station master or, someone there working, and tell them the stop I needed to get to. And they directed me to the appropriate platform. Now, these days, kids would pull out a phone and say, Mum, what do I do? And so they're lacking that area in the front of the brain, developing to think for themselves. So I would just say that, yes, it will be hard for parents. I don't think that that's changed. I think it was, it's always been hard for parents to let kids do things more and more independently. But as you said, I don't think that you should be waiting as a parent for yourself to feel comfortable with it necessarily. You know, as I said, you put in place, right, well, other children are going to be there. There's going to be a group. This is how it's going to work. You might talk to them about a few things, but if you're waiting for yourself to feel completely comfortable with them doing that, it will never happen. It will never happen because they'll grow up into adulthood and they still won't do it. They'll still be calling you, like I know 20-somethings do, Mum, can you get me a prescription? I mean, that's not a one-off example. I'm hearing increasingly that. So we need to, for those who still have children under 18, we really need to take heed of that and say the alternative is not good for our children. And my anxiety has to be faced myself and put aside to a degree right now. And we start with small trips and we do it again and again. And then I feel better with my anxiety calming down that they've returned. And, then we go a bit further and a bit further.
Yes.
But we start somewhere. You have to start.
Start before you're ready. It's classic, and it's so important with anxiety for them and for us, because it shows up around what's important. And as parents, our kids are incredibly the most important people in our lives, and so of course we're going to feel anxious. But like you say, the more they do it and the more we do it, the easier it gets. And now I've got our son doesn't tend to as much, but our daughters, because they're always wanting to sort of pop to the shops and things, they're on the buses. And a couple of the girls the other day were telling me they missed a stop. It was so funny, honestly. Gorgeous kids. They're 13 and 14. They missed the stop and they ended up at the bus depot, right? So they didn't realise that. And the bus driver went to hop off and they just thought he was going to just have a cuppa and then come back and take them where they, get back on the road. And he got a fright when he kind of went to lock up the bus and realised there were a couple of girls sitting behind him, because he couldn't see them in his rearview mirror, obviously. And he's like, what are you doing? And they're like, well, we're just going to wait until it's time to go again, and we've missed our stop. And he's like, this bus is done for the day. And so, I thought, how fantastic. It's a funny story that they reflect on now, and they just had to sort it out, and they did. They miss stops all the time. And they just laugh about it. And so it's all a part of learning, whether our kids are coming home, looking devastated about something that's happened, or whether or not they miss out on something, or whether or not they've got a challenge in their life of any kind. What helps me is to think this is an opportunity for growth and learning. And that's kind of like a little mini mantra I'll say in my head. And sometimes I'm saying keep a neutral face, Jodie, because I don't want to overreact. But just that if we can look at it from that point of view and remember what you said, the alternative is disastrous. Really dependent children, or young adults, I should say, if our children are really highly dependent young adults, we'll be wondering where we went wrong. And it's time is now. No matter where you're at, no matter what you've been doing, the time is now. It's never too late to start. And start small, like you suggested, and recognize when the anxiety shows up, name it, notice it, settle it down in the ways that you know how. But we don't have to wait, like you said, till we feel comfortable to allow our kids to do what they need to do. And it's the same for them with their own anxiety around things, that we might suggest, hey, I can't pick you up. I need you to catch the bus. And there's lots of challenges. Life's full of them. And so we need to prepare them. Claire, your insights and your suggestions are so important. And, the bonus is independence, learning how to wash and iron your own clothes and cook a meal and budget. And that takes the pressure off us. So yay, that's good.
Well, and this is the thing. This is when I'm kind of getting, you will turn up whinging to your friends and family and professionals that your 16-year-old can't do anything.
Yes.
But if you haven't allowed them that space to be able to not only do things, but also stuff up and make mistakes and have some failures along the way, that story about, your daughter and the buses is a great example. And particularly as you were saying that, I was just thinking, children also need, at any age, young children into teenagers, they need these stories with their friends in a child world where they stuff up and they problem solve and they have fights and they resolve it without adult intervention all the time. And that goes for play, not hovering over them, letting them roam out the front or the backyard and just letting them get on with it, right up into teenage years where they have to go out and take a bit of risk sometimes. That's part of teenage years. That terrifies parents. But you know what? As long as you have that, good relationship that they feel like they can turn to you if the risk doesn't pay off or if something happens and oh goodness, I actually do need adult help now, I'll go to mum or dad.
Yeah.
But they need that time where they, stuff up, take risks, make mistakes, get lost, form memories and work it out without us. And that's all part of the separation. We don't want to be completely enmeshed as the one person. That's not the point of having children.
No, it is not. And our job is to raise them to be independent and to be self-sufficient and to make ourselves redundant in many ways. And so, it's been such a great conversation, gosh. And I really, it's got me thinking, there are certain things, even around my own home, that I think I could up the ante on. The kids in my home are doing well and they have chores and they're cooking once a week. And I was listening to your episode with Mel Brown on your podcast, and one of the things that I haven't done yet that I'd really love to do, and I've got this inspiration from your podcast, which is On the Couch with Claire, which we'll talk about in a moment. You were chatting with Mel Brown. It was such a great podcast episode. And she was saying, it's not just about cooking, it's about budgeting for a meal and recognising that, well, if you want to go and do Scotch fillet steaks, if the 15-year-old says, I'm cooking Scotch fillet steak for dinner, well, there's a cost that comes with that versus having maybe a $5 per head budget for the family and factoring these types of skills so that when our kids do fly the coop and set up house on their own, they've got not only the skills to do the shopping, budget, recognise that everything costs money and that there is an expense with every meal, know how to cook, know how to clean up, know how to wash the clothes that the sauce spills on down the front of the shirt, and know how to iron them when they've got a work shift. So, all of that, they're all incredible skills and we don't have to do it all overnight. But this is a good reminder, I think, for all of us that the confidence, the self-esteem that comes from it and the independence is all so good for them. It's really good to give them the confidence to do other things, which is a real antidote to anxiety, as you said. And, we can rest assured that even though when the days are hard and our hearts are hurting and we know our kids are struggling, that we're setting them up for life in ways that are loving and supportive, but with an eye on the future and what they're going to need to be able to sort of survive in the real world. So, it's been brilliant chatting to you today, Claire. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
And what about connecting with you and working with you? Because I know you work clinically and you have a team of psychologists also, and you have your podcast. how can people work with you and connect with you and find you online, please?
Yeah, so my podcast has just launched and it's called On the Couch with Claire. And every week I have a different guest and we talk about a whole range of topics. It's not just parenting and child psychology. As you said, I'll talk about women's financial literacy. I talk about online app dating with someone. I talk about
Ooh.
family law with a family law barrister. I talk about a wonderful episode on procrastination and how we can stop procrastinating. So all very, very varied, and people can listen to that. And otherwise, if you'd like to find where I am in my consulting rooms and connect with me, the best place is probably just clarerowe.com.au.
And it's ClareRowe for the spelling.
That's right.
when you're typing that into Google. Claire, yes, I've really enjoyed listening to your podcast, and well done, because it's a classic example of we build our confidence and our expertise with anything new as we go. And the episodes that I've listened to, I've loved. So dive in onto your podcast app and check out Claire online, follow her socials. And if you're looking for some support for you in your own family, then of course telehealth is available. So Claire and her colleagues are in Sydney, but you can connect from anywhere. So Claire, thank you again for your wisdom and for so many practical examples and for these insights, because we do have a big job as parents, and conversations like these make that job clearer and also give us some really practical ways that we can, really build the independence and stay connected with our kids, but really set them up with the skills that they need for the rest of their life. So thanks again.
Thanks, Jodie. It's been so great to connect. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave a review. To keep the conversation going, I'd love you to join me over on Instagram. You'll find me at Dr. Jodie Richardson. Also, if you'd like a copy of my free 5-day mini email course, Calm Your Anxious Brain, then jump over to my website, drjodirichardson.com, and you can sign up down the bottom. I've really enjoyed having your company. Thanks so much. See you next time.